Okay, thank you everyone for hopping on and joining us for this event with young activists following the TPNW MSP this past month in Vienna. We're really excited to have you all on. A reminder, this is a panel conversation, so please, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them. Alternatively, feel free to raise your hand nearer to the end of the session when we're accepting audience questions, so we can get to what you have to say. And again, it's more of a conversation. First off, I would ask all of our speakers, our lovely speakers, to introduce themselves. So I will pass that off over to them. And I believe Rose first.
Hi, everybody. It's really wonderful to be attending this call today and speaking to all of you. I've been able to attend some other IPPNWC calls in the past, and it's all really exciting, especially following all of the events that happened in Vienna. My name is Rose Ali. I am going into my first year at the University of Toronto, and in terms of all this work, I've been doing it for a number of years now. And just really excited to be here and to have had the opportunity to go to the first meeting of state parties for the TPNW in Vienna. I'm really looking forward to speaking to all of you.
Thanks so much, Rose. Leah, go ahead.
Hi all. I think I know most of you. My name's Leah. I'm a staff with IPPNW Canada, and it was an absolute pleasure to be at the MSP TPNW representing IPPNW and Canada, and I'm so excited to discuss it with all of you tonight.
Hi, I think I'm next. It's great to see you all. My name is Molly McGinty. I am the Associate Program Director with IPPNW Central Office in the Boston area. I've been with IPPNW Central for about 3 years now. A lot of my work centers around working with our international medical student movement, young doctors, general network. And it's great to see some familiar names and faces here. And I hope that I get to work with all of you a little bit more in the next year. But yeah, just like Rose and Leah said, going to the first meeting of states parties was just a really incredible experience. You know, first time seeing everybody in person since I started with IPPNW. So it was a very, very great moment. I'm excited to talk to you all about it a little bit more. I think Sarah's next.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a bit new to IPPNWC as I'm intern for the summer, which I'm really excited about. And I'm a youth coordinator for Reverse the Trend Canada, and I'm about to enter my second year of at the University of British Columbia.
Great, thank you all for doing those little introductions. I'm sure all of our participants already have some questions, but we have a few that we wanted to start with for the panel. And the first of which is, what were your general impressions of the forum, the MSP, and the other events in Vienna? That it was a week and a little bit of a lot of action, and we want to know what's your general impressions coming out of it. And I'll pass that over to our speakers. Feel free to jump in.
Okay, thank you for the question, Margaret. I believe I'm first off to answer. For me personally, it was my first time traveling for something that related to nuclear disarmament and attending such a big forum, as it is the first of its kind, the first meeting to happen. And I'd say it was truly a historic event on the entirety of the week. And I could definitely feel that myself in attending and working alongside other youth. It was very empowering to see how many people gathered there all together, and it really gave me a greater idea and gave me an opportunity to better value the people that were able to get me there, the people that I had worked with that I hadn't been able to meet in person until that week. So it was really an opportunity for myself and others to feel connected, and it made me feel much more connected to the work being done, and made it feel a lot less lonely sometimes, as this is such a widely dispersed network of people. So it was really empowering, I think, overall, to see how many young people were there, and also the people that I've gotten to meet over the years.
Yeah, building off of what you were saying, Roj, I think this was one of the most energizing and inspiring moments for me personally, and I think for many of the other people there in peace activism in a really, really, really long time. It was really incredible to see how big and widespread and diverse the movement for nuclear disarmament is. I think a lot of the time when you're sitting alone in your room on a Zoom call, even though we have each other and we have this community and really like this wonderful, wonderful space, it's easy to feel like it's a very small movement. Or when you're talking with colleagues and friends, it's easy to feel like you care a lot about this, but not enough people know, and it's a very like small movement. And another thing I think we often all hear is that young people don't care about these issues and young people don't know about these issues, but to be in a space of hundreds of activists who all are dedicating so much time, many of whom, you know, found a way to get themselves to Vienna, many of whom, you know, just so many dedicated people, each of whom represent groups of even more people around the world who are committed to the abolition of nuclear weapons, was a really, really energizing thing. And also to see how many specifically young people cared really, really helped to break down the stereotype that young people don't care, and really reaffirmed something that I think a lot of us believe, that when young people are informed and when young people hear about these issues, they care and they want to do something and they're energized to. And then also specifically for me personally, and I'm sure Molly, you'll probably echo this a lot, but like to see how big and powerful IPPNW specifically is throughout the entire time. Every time I said I'm from IPPNW, people would go, another one? IPPNW is one of the largest delegations, and also really, really powerful and articulate delegation. The co-president Carlos of IPPNW Central was actively speaking in a lot of the statements and a lot of the negotiations happening. So really, really inspiring to see IPPNW as a part of this historic, as a central part of this historic landmark treaty, and see IPPNW having such a large presence and being a part of making history. So I think, like, in general impressions, in short, the biggest thing would just be how energizing it was to see how big civil society is and to see what a big part IPPNW takes within that.
Yeah, definitely echo both Roj and Leah on all of that. I think one of my biggest surprises too, you know, leading up to this meeting, we heard within the ICANN network. I also, part of my role with IPPNW is serving on ICANN's international steering group. So I heard in those calls, you know, we're expecting a few hundred people. Nobody really knows with COVID. We're trying to figure out visas for so many people. So in my head, you know, I was kind of expecting 200 people, some involvement, a lot of speakers, but who knows how many people. Seeing 500 people in one conference space and 500 people who care so deeply about this topic and who are so engaged in every single panel, and you would leave panels and you would have these sidebar conversations that were even more insightful than the panels themselves, just talking about what our next steps are going to be and how people got there and why they're there, was just incredible. I mean, like Leah said, and like I've already said, this was my first in-person big meeting with IPPNW and with disarmament generally, and it was just so incredible. And there were a number of climate activists there, which I really think honed in the idea for a lot of us that the way forward is to connect with other movements and to connect with other people who already kind of see the flaws in our system. And then when you show how much money we're spending on nuclear weapons and what nuclear weapons actually do to the climate and to people, really, really wakes people up. I think that was just really kind of brought home for me by talking to climate activists in person. Again, I Zoom is incredible, and being right here with all of you right now is incredible, but nothing can take away from in-person conversations with people. So I think that was another thing that was really made apparent to me. One other thing, and I think this just goes along with the amount of people that were there, but the creativity that people bring. There were so many threads of events and actions that were going on. That first weekend we had the ICANN forum, and then we had an IPPNW bike tour on the Sunday, which if you've been involved with IPPNW for a while, you know that IPPNW students and young doctors just love their bike tours. And I was so glad we were able to have one that was a little bit smaller, going around Vienna. Leah took part in it. I sadly wasn't actually able to, but being a part of the planning, we had 30 participants from over 25 countries that were a part of it, from all different groups, all wearing some IPPNW gear, IPPNW logo, being able to go around Vienna and shout about the nuclear ban treaty and showing the community in Vienna about how much we care about this, and being able to reach new people, and creative chants and all those things is just so life-giving. So that was really exciting to see. And then we had the Youth for TPNW conference and the groups there, and all the ideas that people came with, just such fresh ideas about what should be next and what can come. And then obviously the MSP itself, which I think sometimes these UN meetings can be a little bit dry, and not too much happens, but I think people are just so excited about this treaty. Even diplomats were, singing "We're all one happy family" during the conference, and really engaging with one another, and just a really big sense of community, I guess, is really what I think, in a way that's really incredible. So yeah, I think my biggest takeaways are just that we have a really incredible network here, and I think that we should continue to think of ways to utilize it within the IPPNW world, and a little bit beyond it as well, to move this forward. So Sarah.
Yeah, I definitely think my biggest impression as well was how widespread this movement actually is, as well as how large of a diversity of experiences, academic fields, and perspectives that were presented there, especially at the ICANN forum. I mean, hearing from scientists and lawmakers and medical professionals and activists from a bunch of different perspectives from different countries in the world, some regions you don't necessarily associate with nuclear weapons, and just seeing the intersections and their stakes in this movement in particular, whether that be militarization, nuclear umbrella, deterrence, just the general fear of nuclear weapons. I loved attending different events, particularly from the Middle East, from Africa, from climate change, and just seeing the amount of passion that people have in combining these movements and showing people how it is related to their movements, which I think was really impactful, because you have to reach people in those different ways, which makes this movement so much stronger. And yeah, I think that was my biggest takeaway from the event in general impression.
Great, thank you all so much. I know that that's kind of a hard question, considering so much has come out of that meeting. My next question for you all is regarding the positive outcomes of these meetings. What, for yourself, was the biggest positive that you were able to get as a young peace activist coming out of Vienna? And I'll pass that over to Roj as well.
Thank you so much. Well, also thank you to the others for, I think for me, like giving my answer and then hearing how much more can be added to it was really like wonderful to hear. For me, a positive impact. I think as a young person, oftentimes experiences in diplomacy and advocacy are limited. You don't get many opportunities to do anything in that scope of work. So you oftentimes have to wait until after university, or you need to have special connections to get there. And I think for me as a young person, as a young leader, attending the conferences, attending the forum was an opportunity for me to gain important skills in witnessing how diplomacy functions and how it intersects with advocacy. Because I think sometimes those two are really put aside and very segregated from one another, because they don't seem like they work too well with one another. But in being in Vienna and seeing the forum happen, which was a big like breeding ground for advocacy and advocates to come together. And then right afterwards, the MSP, I think it really showed that past politics, past the bureaucracy of all of it, there is a network of people, from diplomats to advocates to professionals to medical professionals, who all have the same agreement on what is going on. And I think for me as a young person, honestly, just being present to witness that and see that happen in like live around me was a way for me to better understand that there is so many different avenues to pursue this, and it's not limited to one. And I came out of it with networking and connections and meeting people that I otherwise would not have the opportunity to meet through my schooling, through my even community a lot of the times. So I came out of it with like connections with people and knowledge of these different experiences that I honestly would not have been able to gain otherwise. And it just made me more aware and grateful for all of it as a whole. So I came out of it with knowledge, way more information than I did before, and more of an awareness of how much is going on now around the world, different movements. And there's some people whose work I had never heard of before, whom I got the chance to meet and connect with and get their information for. And I was able to see, well, this work actually intersects really well with some of the projects that I'm leading or the projects that I'm involved in, and just kind of like mapping it out in my head and how they can all connect to one another. So I think a lot of people saw the meeting as like the main event. But I think more than that, it was kind of the beginning to so much more down the line in the next few years, as all of us have gotten this opportunity to connect with one another.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Roj. I really completely like echo everything you're saying in learning about the connections between diplomacy and civil society. And I think one of my biggest takeaways as a young person coming out of this is really just being reaffirmed in my belief of civil society to make, of the ability of civil society to make an impact and change, because we had the chance to watch it happen, to watch ICANN and IPPNW, also civil society and civil society members create change both through the TPNW and through all the discussions and the action plan that came out of it. Within the first couple of days, so within the entire week, first there was a 2-day convergence for run by ICANN, which was just as Sarah explained, various academics and various people from different parts of civil society presenting and sharing information and ideas, including Molly and Roj, who were both speakers, really incredible speakers, I'll add. And then after that was 1 day of expertise hosted by the Austrian government, the Vienna Conference for the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons. And then after that was the actual MSP. But in advance of the actual MSP, everything organized by experts, and just as a result of states attending the exchange of ideas and information from civil society and experts, 3 states ended up signing on June 20th. And just to watch how civil society got 3 more state parties to the TPNW, and within a couple days later, a 4th one. Within 2 weeks after the TPNW, 4 more states joined this landmark treaty. So that really just opened my mind up to really just like watching firsthand how civil society created a really significant change in the world in front of my eyes. And then also hearing in discussions in the meeting room, doctors and scientists sharing their research and seeing how that resulted in policy, how a takeaway in the Vienna Action Plan was now there's a scientific advisory committee that's mandated and funding put towards that by the states who signed it. So just watching how the doctors of IPPNW and watching how the activists in ICANN and activists like far-reaching created some really substantive change. And then a final like moment that really impacted that was listening to one speaker, Zia Mann, who works at Princeton, I believe, as a physicist and in policy, alongside Ray Atchison. And he was speaking about how we were all sitting in Vienna, and he was saying, who here thinks about and remembers the Austro-Hungarian Empire? And everyone kind of like chuckled, like, what? And then he goes, who remembers the British Empire? And then he reminded us that change happens rapidly and no one sees it coming. But when it happens fast. And, you're to some degree, you're naive to think that it won't happen. And sitting in that room, change was happening right then and there. And it also made me think of the John Lennon quote, peace is possible if you want it, if we want it. Nuclear disarmament is a topic which we as humans we can change, and we can change it here and we can change it now. So it's very inspiring. It reaffirmed my belief in this work and reaffirmed my joy to be here with you all working towards it.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. I guess after Roj and Leah, I don't know what else to add, honestly. They covered so much of the positive outcomes from Vienna, but I think the biggest thing for me, and I'll put it in the chat just in case anybody hasn't seen it, but was that creation of the declaration and the really concrete action plan that Leah just touched on, which includes the Scientific Advisory Board and a timeline for nuclear weapon states when they join the treaty, because they will join the treaty when they join it, to the deadlines to destroy their nuclear weapons and what that actually looks like, and then the establishment of intercessional work. So I think all those really are the nuts and the bolts of it. But to know that there is that action plan in place and that we actually will have a future without nuclear weapons because we have a plan that sets that out is just really not even just inspiring, but we talk about this stuff all the time. We talk about how this is our future as young people and how we need to take hold of it. But to know that there's a plan to make it actually happen kind of feels like it takes a weight off of our shoulders, right? A way that what we know needs to happen will happen. And like Leah said, just seeing the process when we were in Vienna was both educational and also just really great to know that there are people who are working so incredibly hard to make the action plan a reality and to make it a concrete one, and one that is very firm. I'm looking now that the deadline for destruction of nuclear weapon states is no more than 10 years after they join the treaty. That doesn't really leave them much leeway room to say like, oh, actually we're changing our minds, because we know especially the US in recent years has decided to join treaties and to pull out of them. And this doesn't really give them that space to do that. So I think that was from leaving Vienna was one of the most positive outcomes that I saw. And coincidentally enough, it was one that I had the least to do with, which was kind of great to just know that while we were doing all this other stuff and all the youth actions, the bike tour, that really important work was being done here on the sidelines, not on the sidelines, in the main room. So yeah, I think that was, from my perspective, one of the most positive. Pass it to Sarah.
Yeah, I think my biggest positive outcome was more motivation. Before going to Vienna, I felt my starting to fall off with other responsibilities, other things that I had going on. But going there and seeing all of these people throwing so much passion into it through their work, whether it's just a group they're a part of or their full-time job, it was incredible. And seeing how much more I had to learn, but also making connections and seeing all these different groups that were so involved and invested that I could reach out to back here in Canada, and starting to create that network, which I never had the opportunity to do before. And I know now I have so many more perspectives to look on and do research for different parts of the world and different movements taking place and different opportunities for action, which I hadn't considered before, whether that was through art or through reaching out to different groups and creating different webinar series, creating different podcasts, seeing how much action in different ways was going on. We met someone who had written a play based on the TPNW, and another who had written a play based on their experience with uranium mining and radiation and their personal experience. And it was very heartfelt. And just seeing all that action, I guess, and coming out of that, I had so much more motivation and ideas and opportunities to move forwards with. And I think for me, that was my biggest outcome from the events.
Thanks so much, everyone. I know your input is all really valuable, and it's great to hear that you all are having the same experiences coming out of the MSP in terms of same positives, because if there's consensus on positives, there's consensus on the good work that was done during those days. Now that we've talked a little bit about the many, many positives, what were some, for lack of a better term, negative aspects of the MSP and other events that you had? Not necessarily in what was bad about these meetings, but what do you think was a point of potential development or a point of improvement that could be done in regards to these diplomatic meetings, which aren't necessarily spaces built for young activists like ourselves? What were some of those that you maybe experienced, if you would like to share? And in addition to that, how do you think that we can reduce these aspects that were potentially negative in the future at these meetings? And I will pass it over to Molly.
Sure. Yeah, I actually, when I saw you send this earlier this week, this question earlier this week, I don't know if there are any, but it did strike me, and this wasn't my experience. This is why I didn't think of it, but there were a number of people, a lot of people who weren't able to make it to Vienna because of funding problems, and most prominently because of the way that our systems are set up, that people weren't able to get visas in time. There are a number of reasons of why this happened. You know, because of COVID, the first meeting of states parties had to be pushed back a few times. We didn't get the final confirmation until mid-April. That doesn't leave much leeway time. And there's also the issue of Austria not having embassies everywhere. So there were a lot of layers to this, not necessarily being an easy process for people, but there were a number of people who were really, really excited to come to Vienna to have the same experience that we're talking about right now, and who are working until the last minute to get their visas. I can't speak to her experience, but one of our international student representatives on the board of IPPNW from India went to 4 different states to get her visa, and she was able to get it in time, but she was traveling for 2 weeks before even coming to Vienna. It's extremely expensive, obviously, to even travel within a country. And we were lucky enough to have the funding to get her to Vienna once she got her visa. But again, she had to take time off work. She had to take time away from her family. She had to travel. There's so many layers to it, all just to prove, you know, that she wasn't trying to come to Vienna and start a new life there when she's in the middle of medical school. You know, it's a really ridiculous system when you boil it down to that level. So that was one of the most negative experiences. She luckily was able to get there, but there were dozens and dozens and dozens of people who weren't able to be there because of that dual visa and funding problem. I mean, I think what we can do to minimize that in the future, you know, I think across the IPPNW spectrum, we all need more money, right? All of the affiliates, the central office, we need to figure out new, unique ways to get more funders. It's been kind of an issue for a while in the disarmament space generally, because if we had this kind of foundational money first, then we could have promised, funding more people to get there and have more voices, because it's not just those individuals not being able to be in the room, it's us not hearing their perspectives, and then we have an incomplete view of what we need. And that action plan I was talking about could be different if we had different people in the room. And hopefully we will have more lead time in the future for when these dates will be set, so that we're able to get people's visa processes started much earlier. And I think that does particularly impact younger people in a different way, because for a lot of people, if you're 20 years old, you've been in the pandemic for 3 years and you don't even know how to get a visa in the first place. There's more time required, and visas can be a little bit stricter on younger people. So I think that was probably the most negative. And I think there are a few ways that we can mitigate that, while also understanding that it's just a system that doesn't really work for everyone. So yeah, and I will pass it to Sarah.
Yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about with the accessibility of internationals. With Reverse the Trend, we had a lot of people that had visa problems, and someone who was supposed to be in our housing with me and Roj couldn't even attend because they were still waiting. And as youth, on another point, I think the most interesting aspect would be being a youth in such a formal atmosphere. It's a very different environment, very intimidating. I know we had wanted, me and Roj, to talk to different diplomats from the different states, but we weren't sure if we were allowed to do that, if we could, how to go about doing that. And it seemed to be this barrier between civil society at the back of the room and the diplomats at the front. And very little people would cross that border and interact, which I think was kind of sad, because you want these youth voices there, you want civil society there, but there's only a select amount of space for them to voice their opinions. We had 2 youth give youth statements, but that was it. And then you didn't really hear youth beyond that point, which is kind of sad as well, because I know we had written a number of working papers, different youth groups, but then those were put on a website and then not really brought up again. So there is a lack of youth presence, it feels like. We're there, but we're not there in that sense. There's not a lot of room to maneuver, which I think can definitely be improved at, both during the MSP and in intercessional times, through working groups, through meetings with the different diplomats, and just trying to see more youth engagement before as well, because to get our voices to those diplomats, that when those spaces present themselves, they already know how we feel, how we think, especially with youth in their personal regions. Yeah, those are just some options. Of course, there are multiple ways that youth can be more represented, and I think Youth for TPNW was a brilliant way to start doing that as well.
Leah, do you want to go next? And then we have Roj. And I see a question. If questions could go in the chat for now. If not, happy to answer once Leah and Roj have answered this question.
Yeah, well, building off of Molly and Sarah so far, but yeah, I think, yeah, building off of Molly and Sarah, I feel very fortunate to have personally not had very many negative experiences, and similarly to Molly, I had to give this question like some proper, or a bit of thought and reflection beforehand. In like second year university, I took a course on gender and international relations, and I wrote a paper on just marginalized group and security spaces, and the hostility towards marginalized groups, including young people, and it was specifically on women, is something I had read a lot of literature on, and something I felt very well versed in, like as a very distant thought. But it was definitely it was sad to see, and I don't know, I was surprised to see it in person. And so that was a bit disheartening when seeing that. And I think there are two major things to be done. One is inviting diverse group and marginalized voices into the room. And despite the hurdles and the fact so many people, as Molly said, couldn't even get there, I was so impressed by how many resources were allocated, and how many young people were in the room, and how many people from various like far regions of the world made it there because people put time and effort and funding into supporting their process. So like inviting diverse groups into the room like deserves applause as like a wonderful first step. But as Sarah mentioned, there's no point having them in the room if they're not speaking. And I remember one thing I'd written in my paper was about how even though we're approaching 50% of like women in the room for security spaces, it's only 28% of the time that they're speaking. And when you go to, or in general in the UN, and then when you go to security spaces, it's even less. And I very much noticed that within the MSP, even though there were many, many, many diverse people in the room, it was very specific times that they were allocated time to speak, and it was very limited. And in the general time to speak, they were rarely talking, and they were rarely given the opportunity. So it's one thing inviting people into a room, and I think it's a wonderful first step, but then the next is making sure that the space is safe for them to speak and not a hostile environment. And with that comes the expectation of diverging opinions. If you're inviting someone for their unique perspective, you cannot expect them to conform to the norms and say exactly what you want them to say, and say, like, speak or act exactly the way you expect. So that's something that I think we can all think about in incorporating the beliefs we promote into our movement, just ways to not only bring people into this movement from other movements and diverse perspectives, but make sure that the space we're creating is safe and comfortable, and that if we're inviting them for their unique perspectives, that we are truly and genuinely welcoming them, and knowing that they may convey themselves in a different way, or if it's a young person, perhaps speaking more informally, or using different language, and allowing them to do so nonetheless. Because if we want a diverse movement, we have to create a space. We have to not only bring the invitations, but allow space.
Leah, you put that really well. So did you, Molly and Sarah. I feel like as the last person to answer this question, and it's a pretty, it's not a question I feel like is asked as often when these kinds of things happen. So pardon me, just kind of echoing what everyone else has said in saying that a lot of people had barriers and not being able to go. And also, as everyone has stated, there's a big also barrier between the people attending. And like everything Leah has said, I myself personally had a lot of anxiety about certain language I would use, or how to use particular language, because I'm not exposed to those spaces very often. It's not something that is encouraged often amongst young people, to be in rooms with diplomats, to be in that big decision table. But in being present there, and it was kind of an opportunity to see that underneath a lot of the decades of experience many of the attendees had, there was also like still a genuine person who cared about the topic. And I think we need to highlight that more, in saying that at the end of the day, whether you have 50 years of experience in this and you are working at the United Nations, or you are a diplomat of some kind, or even if you're just an advocate who just got into it, at the end of the day, we're all kind of working towards the very same goal. And we have the same plans, we have the same thoughts towards it, or somewhat the same. Of course, there is room for differentiating opinions. And sometimes, I think sometimes we won't necessarily agree with each other on all of this, but we all can collectively agree that we're working towards the same goal. And I think oftentimes with these discussions and these moments in history, these moments in this work where people are gathering in one place, it can become very, very easy to hyperfixate on each individual person's own experience and their particular perspectives and like this certain area that they work within, that we kind of take away from the fact that at the very end of the day, whether you're focusing on the medical side of it, or you're trying to promote gender equality in discussions and trying to get more people to the decision table, at the very end, it's all kind of coming together and working towards the very same endpoint. And I think, especially for young people, and as Leah was saying, there's a big kind of sometimes a little bit of a disagreement or hostility at times towards people who might be new to this, or who might have a different set of experience, but nonetheless, that experience is still valuable and needed in these discussions. So I think kind of like I really have nothing more to add besides echoing what everyone has said, because it was said very well. And it's nice to see that we all kind of had very similar experiences and kind of came away with similar takeaways and plans moving forward.
Thank you all. And just to comment on some of what you said as well, all of you touched on the fact that these meetings are sometimes very segregated. These meetings aren't a setting that a lot of us are used to. And I think that also fits into some of the positives of being able to gain experience in these settings. And just based on my own experience, being fortunate to be a young person, given space in these spaces before, the first meeting is the hardest to talk to people and diplomats, but I really do believe that afterwards it gets better. And these meetings are about gaining as much as you can just by being there, by meeting people, talking about the issues and engaging with them, that by the time the next MSP rolls around, you all will be, you'll realize how much you gained from this experience as well, in my opinion. Moving on, one more question before we move into the audience Q&A session. So if any of you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand after all of our panelists answer this next question. So just as a note, feel free to put your questions in the chat. Otherwise, final question that I have for all of the panelists on my end today is, coming out of the MSP, what do you believe to be the most prevalent or pressing points, issues, or messages you see needed to address within the next year? So there was a lot of stuff and talk that happened at the MSP. And just to narrow down what really moved you, what do you believe needs to be addressed in some sort of way in your work in the next year coming out of this experience?
Is it me? Okay, great. Yeah, no, thank you. I really like this question. I do want to say, again, just to touch on the last question, Rose, thank you for asking it. And I wanted to thank you again for asking it too, because I think that sometimes you can leave these meetings with, what's the term, like rose tinted glasses, like you leave it like, oh, it was so nice to see everyone, and it was, but I think it's also important to, critically look at some of this and think about how we can improve it, and not just critically look at it just to be critical, but to think of how we can make all of our spaces more equitable, because if we're going to abolish nuclear weapons and then we still have a very inequitable society, what are we doing this for? I think they all have to go hand in hand. Anyways, that was kind of an aside, but I guess for what I think the most prevalent or pressing point, I think is really similar to my answer to the second question, and just that this is a completely solvable issue that we have the tools to fix. You know, this isn't something like climate change, where at this point we can make changes as human beings, but is partially, you know, it's nature taking hold. We have full control over the nuclear arsenals, and we are able to dismantle them and to eliminate them wholeheartedly and fully. And I think taking hold of that fact and using the action plan that we have and working in our regional or national context and pushing that forward, I think is something that we need to bring to people, because, you know, I've heard both within my circles and even when I'm, you know, talking to my family who doesn't know anything about disarmament, that I'm fear mongering sometimes, and I'm scaring people and all of these things. And to a point, I think it's okay for people to be scared because it's a terrifying situation. But I think that we can't just scare people or tell them all of these horrifying things that would happen if a nuclear weapon were to ever explode again, or if there was any sort of nuclear war. I think telling people the risks, getting that to motivate them, and then saying, but we have the tools to fix it. This isn't some natural occurrence. This isn't us waiting for a volcano to erupt somewhere 800 miles away, you know? So I think knowing that we can just push politicians, if we have the political will, this will happen. I think we saw a lot of progress at the MSP. I mean, Leah commented on the 3 states that ratified the day before the MSP. There were also so many observer states from countries that we didn't necessarily think were going to come. You know, Australia decided 2 days before, the Netherlands decided 3 days before. All of these states that are under the so-called nuclear umbrella had so much political pressure from their constituents that they decided to come and to listen, both to the Humanitarian Impacts Conference and to the states parties themselves. You know, none of those countries left feeling particularly inclined to sign or ratify the treaty, and we didn't expect that. But again, I think that we need to take these as wins and not just small wins, but the fact that they were in the room means that for the second meeting of states parties, hopefully they'll be there again, and we'll have 5 more, and we'll grow from there. So I think just, again, the thing that we need to push forward to people is that we have the power to change this. And I definitely think that we can. You know, it's not some abstract future of a peaceful utopian world without nuclear weapons. It's something that we can do in all of our lifetimes, I hope. And I think I'll leave it at that and pass it to Sarah. I don't know why I can't keep track of this lineup. I think it's Sarah.
Yeah, it's me. And yeah, I think large part of that is pressuring governments and educating the public so that they can pressure the government, because a lot of people don't know anything about nuclear weapons or anything about the action taking place, about the TPNW or different nuclear weapon free zones across the world, about states that have committed to nuclear peace and disarmament, and how widespread this movement actually is. And I think if a lot of people, more people knew about that, knew how widespread, how many people don't want nuclear war or nuclear weapons, they might be a lot more encouraged for Canada to sign on. And also educating the international community about the issues of environmental remediation and victim assistance. And keeping those processes now with working groups transparent for everyone to know what's going on, so that people can hold those groups accountable, can hold the states and groups committing to this accountable, so that we can make sure the action that is intended to come out of the MSP actually happens, and this work continues going on.
Yeah, I think I really, really agree with everything that's been said so far by Molly and Sarah, specifically on putting our focus on pressuring governments and getting Canada to sign. I think that I'm really, really excited to be coming out of the MSP and working with IPPNWC, TPNW working group. And I think that it's one of the most important things we can be doing right now within the Canadian context is yeah, well, without, I won't go too much because I don't want to repeat everything Sarah and Molly wonderfully laid out, but educating the general public to create more pressure for Canada to sign, and then also trying to directly engage with Canada to get Canada to sign, harnessing any momentum that we have coming out of the MSP and leveraging our connections, both with IPPNW Central, with IPP, with our affiliates, and with the connections from successful campaigns all over the world, to learn from them and work with them. I'll pass it on to Rose.
Thank you. This is all wonderful. And I think just for the sake of time, I really don't have much else to add besides saying we need to pressure our governments a lot more. I think the forum that took place through ICANN was a great example of what a supportive government can really push to do, because Austria is supportive of all of this. And I think that was a great example of when a country truly supports and backs these kinds of initiatives, how you can create something like the ICANN Nuclear Ban Forum, which in and of itself was organized like amazingly, and everything about it was one of a kind for myself. And I hope that it's not the only of its kind. I definitely hope that more happens. And that just means that we need to push our governments and focus on how influential financial institutions are in all of this, and how money is a big driving factor behind this. So if we can kind of direct some of that attention to the people who hold that position and power and who have that say, and really anything is possible regarding this.
Thank you all so much for all of your responses and for joining us today. It was so lovely to hear from all of you and share all of your experiences. In the interest of time, we're almost at the hour, but we do have a few questions lined up from our audience. So we will move on to asking those. If any of you participants have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but otherwise we're going to move on to Mary Wynn, who has a question, and hopefully we can get this wrapped up and answer as many questions as possible within the next few minutes, and hopefully not go too much over time. So for all of the speakers, feel free to jump in regards to the question, and we can pass it around. Okay, Mary Wynn, over to you.
First, I'd like to congratulate you on bringing back these really articulate impressions and insights. It's been terrific to listen to you, and really exciting to hear about the progress. I guess my question is, well, it's more of a comment. You were talking about having anxiety about speaking to a diplomat, and what would you say, and how would you ask a question, and would they be hostile, and so on. And I'd like to suggest that diplomats are diplomatic, and that if you, maybe I'll say that probably Kasia has some insights on how to interview people and get past that initial anxiety. And then I would suggest maybe you have some role play exercises on how to approach a diplomat, how to start a conversation, and how to end it. And, you know, ask for a card, tell them that you're working on the website of IPPNW Canada and you'd like to quote the diplomat for saying such and such, and could you take a picture? And believe me, they're human beings and they'll be flattered. So I'd love to hear from Kasia, though, her impressions as someone with a huge experience in interviewing.
Sure, I guess, I mean, I just want to also say thank you to all the panelists for summing up the experience in such a thoughtful and insightful way. And I was also lucky to get to go to the TPNW MSP and meet and connect with all of you. So I'm feeling inspired by your reflections and also by our time at the MSP. To answer the question, I think a big theme and something that I've thought a lot about is connection recently, and finding a way to connect with anybody that you're speaking to, whether it's something you have in common or something that you think, I guess, yeah, I think it's finding one point of connection first to open a conversation. Not necessarily always getting to the hard-hitting questions first, but connecting to them on a human level and trying to open that door and allow them to see that you are also a human too, and you're also curious, and you just want to, I guess maybe not collaborate, but you want to find common ground to work together on. I think that that's the key to opening the door. Sometimes I've been a little quick myself to go in with the heavy hitting questions first, and I see that those barriers come down a lot faster, and that can be difficult to engaging further. So it's like really relationship building. It's delicate, but it also takes courage and just taking that first step. Yeah, I think that that's maybe the best advice that I could give, if I could give any advice on, yeah, asking those questions and having deep conversations and people are humans, no matter their title. Yeah, so at the end of the day, just finding that common ground a little bit.
Any of our panelists as well. Thank you again, Kasia. It was great to see you at the TPNW MSP as well. And so great to have you on here tonight as well. Any of our panelists have any suggestions on breaking down the barriers in conversations? I can also interject with my perspective, which I think speaks to what's already been spoken about, is that underneath the years of diplomatic experience, there's a person who generally cares about the issue. I mean, that's only sometimes. A lot of these people don't know very much about the issue, especially if they don't specialize in the topics of disarmament or nuclear weapons. So it's about offering the knowledge that you know about the topic and positioning yourself as an authority within civil society, because I think that's part of breaking down the barrier, is understanding who are the experts in the room. And most of the time, that's civil society. So it's about starting and engaging a conversation from your point as an expert. And all of our panelists here and all of you in the participants room are all experts on this topic. So I think it's about establishing that and then moving into a point of common ground wherever you can find it, because these are people at the end of the day, and they're at this conference with you, and they also maybe want to engage in something that isn't work for them. So it's about talking to them at a side event or during dinner or lunch. So that's my perspective, and I'll continue to leave the floor open, but if not, then we have a few more questions in the chat.
Yeah, I guess just one brief observation too of something that I learned that I think would have been helpful, and I think it's kind of hard because this was also my first meeting, but something that I want to do going forward is gathering anybody from our delegation. So, we probably should have sent out a blast at IPPNW lists and said, if you're coming to the MSP, let's meet outside a half hour before, so we could have gone through what those kind of expectations are for civil society. I don't know if expectations is the right word, but even just knowing that throughout the meeting you can walk up to the diplomats and kind of say, hey, I'm X, Y, and Z from IPPNW, and I would love to talk to you about this at this time, because it is a really intimidating space, and knowing what those boundaries are, I think is half of the difficulty. So I think whether it's a formal orientation the day before or just an informal conversation before you enter the building, I think would be really helpful. And something that Marguerite, you said before we even started this call was maybe pairing people together, somebody who's has a lot of expertise and somebody maybe who doesn't in these spaces, and having some mentorship there, or shadowing or something like that for the first day or first morning even, I think is really valuable, and something I will think of for the NPT next month. So glad we talked about this.
anyone else on our panel? If not, we have a question from Nancy in the chat. Everyone good if I move on? Okay, great. So Nancy was wondering if there was any discussion about nuclear power during these meetings. It was her understanding that the NPT and TPNW have similar positions regarding nuclear power, which I believe Molly sent a little piece blurb on in the chat. But Nancy is wondering, was there any discussion on this topic? I'll quickly interject, and also what Molly sent in the chat, there was a really great presentation done during the forum, so before the actual MSP, on the specifics of nuclear power and the threats that they pose to nuclear war, nuclear winter, all of those horrific things. So I think there is definitely conversation happening on the point of nuclear power, and especially based on what you do for IPPNWC, Nancy, in regards to the SMNR working group. I think there was engagement on the level of nuclear power and climate change. We need to understand that we can help climate change without nuclear power, without the risks for conflicts that nuclear power continues to pose. There was conversation. I can't speak to the rest of the MSP, but I can speak to a little bit of the forum and what I was hearing there as well. But I will now pass it over to our panelists to also discuss that.
Yeah, just from my memory of the whole event taking place, for the MSP in particular, some state parties did include in their statements points about nuclear power, some of them saying that they would continue to make use of nuclear power and mine and whatnot. I don't know which states it wasn't specifically, so I don't want to missay any ones that I might be unsure of, but there were people in terms of diplomats that attended the MSP who made statements that kind of connected nuclear power and energy with nuclear weapons and their state party's stance on the whole. If anyone else would like to add to that, please feel free.
Yeah, definitely saw that too, Roj, and it is a little bit disappointing, you know, all these states that have such great stances on nuclear weapons, and their stance on nuclear power is very pro peaceful use of the atom. I will say that I know of one working paper that was submitted by an NGO group that called on states parties to amend the treaty and get rid of that statute on the peaceful uses of the atom. That working paper didn't go anywhere, but I think those conversations are being had and will hopefully continue to kind of integrate themselves into the TPNW process. But my personal observation is where it stands now. I don't know if it's going to really make headway anytime soon. I think that my understanding is that states, especially the Austrian government, just want to get the treaty kind of off its feet and really running before tackling something like that that's pretty controversial among states parties.
Yeah, I'm referring to my notes right now. I can't, Molly, maybe you know offhand, I can't remember what group or find what group submitted that working paper, but I believe on the second day they posed a question, but it was not, there was no, they brought up some of the ideas on the second day of the MSP of the working paper in a plenary discussion, but it wasn't addressed very adequately, as Molly mentioned.
Thank you all. If Sarah has anything to add, feel free. Otherwise, Nancy, I hope that well answered your question. Feel free to, once again, message in the chat. Moving on, we have two more questions from Deborah and Dave, which came in the chat as well. So if you have any other questions, everyone who's participating today, feel free to message them there. But moving on to Deborah, were there any parliamentarians or diplomats from Canada in attendance to at least observe and learn? And I may interject as well. I was in Geneva for part of the MSP for a different meeting on landmines, just happened to be, and I know that there was Canadian participation at that treaty meeting because they are party to that treaty. And I think the general, based on my conversations with them there, it seemed that there was a general amicability to potentially participating in the future. In terms of parliamentarians, I will leave that to everyone else, but as far as I know, the diplomats who would have been there were unfortunately in Geneva. But I will move that on to the panelists.
I can add to this, and Sarah, please feel free to also add to this. Yes, there was a parliamentarian present. Senator Mary Lou McPhatran unofficially was present and attended the MSP as well as the forum. She was also a speaker at some of the panels at the ICANN Nuclear Ban Forum, and she was very much standing behind the statement of where is Canada, which she even took pictures of and made like public statements about, and having Sarah and I hold posters for her saying where is Canada, because I had an internship with her that just concluded at the end of June. So, and Sarah, I believe, is still working in her office. So the senator was really impactful in being present there. And as far as I know, may have been the only parliamentarian. Of course, I might be mistaken. Sarah, please add on to that if you'd like.
Yeah, I believe she was the only parliamentarian who attended as well. I know other parliamentarians had wanted to go. Elizabeth May, I believe, really wanted to go. She stated her intent. I know they had a parliamentarian webinar shortly before, trying to raise awareness of the TPNW and try and get parliamentarians to pressure our government to send a delegation, but I don't believe, or they didn't actually end up sending one. And the only person we met parliamentarian-wise from Canada was the senator.
Would anyone else? Oh, Leah, you unmuted.
Yeah, it was really, really inspiring and encouraging to see the presence of the senator, and also to hear there's one other MP, her name is slipping me. Perhaps it's the video you just shared, Avinash. But oh no, okay, that's a different video. Yeah, to see that there are, yes, thank you, Avinash. The Heather, but to see that there are currently parliamentarians in Canada willing to champion these issues through official channels was really, really, really inspiring, and really wonderful that we can work alongside both outside and inside of government, using government channels and as civil society to get these issues, to get Canada to sign the TPNW. And I think it's really, really important in that while we put pressure on Canada and ask Canada, why weren't you here? We also say thank you to the to all of the individual parliamentarians who are coming out to support this treaty, because I know a lot of them, or from conversations with Senator McPhatran, she mentioned that a lot of people are getting backlash for it. So thanking them for their courage in standing up for these issues. And then, yeah, there were nobody was officially representing Canada to learn on behalf of the Canadian government. Everyone who came or supported it was doing it from a distance. So really important also to be asking Canada, why weren't you here? And then also, one of the things Mary Lou McPhatran mentioned, which is potentially interesting in framing and messaging, was that 70% of Canadians want Canada to take action on nuclear disarmament, and Canadians were not Canada has a permanent mission in the Vienna United Nations office, which means we had representatives in the very next room over. We had representatives in the building, and 70% of Canadians wanted this. So all they had to do was enter the room. So it's not just a matter of us wanting this. It's also a matter of democracy. If Canadians want this, and we got to hold our leaders accountable, because Canadians wanted this, and all they had to do was enter the room, and they would have been there. So really, I think a lot of positive relationships for the IPPNWC working group on TPNW, and hopefully we can come up with some concrete actions to get Canada in the room as a start.
Yeah, I think there's also future meetings. We need to maintain the pressure on Canada to be attending these meetings, especially with the precedent that has been set by NATO states coming, as well as Australia. There's no reason that we weren't there, besides that we want to continue upholding this regime that obviously none of us in this meeting would like to continue. Our last question from the audience today is from Dave, and that is, has the Ukraine war set back the TPNW agenda? Which I think is a very loaded question. I think from my perspective, it has done a lot of different things for the TPNW agenda. It's brought nuclear weapons and the threat of nuclear weapons to the forefront. However, it has definitely set back our priorities in terms of reducing military spending. Military spending is, thinking about it in the context that we're currently living within, it was said at the forum and at the MSP that we're currently, at the first time since like 1980 something, at the first time we're starting to think about increasing our nuclear capacity. And by our, I mean the nuclear states are starting to think about this, which is scary. So I'm going to pass this question now over to our panelists to ask, how has the Ukraine war set back the TPNW agenda?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got it right that it's an important question, but it is a very loaded one. And I think there are two massively different spectrums, right, of what you just said, Magritte, about people are paying attention to this issue more than they have, from my understanding. Again, I've been with IPPW for 3 years, but paying more attention to it for the first time in a really, really long time in waves. And I think, you know, we've seen a few, we've gotten inquiries from people in the central office that are from people who said, you know, I was involved in the 80s and Ukraine's kind of woken me up. How can I get involved again? And we're seeing more engagement from people that used to be involved, people that have never thought about this before. And I think that's extremely, I want to be careful because what's happening in Ukraine is horrible, but it's positive for our movement, and hopefully we can use this moment and learn from it and not just let this terrifying moment happen if we're lucky enough to survive the next few months, depending on what happens with the situation. Being able to move forward and to create positive change. Extremely, extremely important that we do that. And I think people are waking up to that. And we're seeing that. On the other hand, I think a lot of states, especially NATO states, are really, really feeding into the theory of deterrence right now, and the myth of deterrence, and fully believing in it. And I think that's a slippery slope that we're falling into. And I think that we need to do everything in our power as IPPNW and as peace activists and as people that care about this issue to fight against that narrative. So I think we are seeing this twofold of people are paying more attention, and there's also the flip side of people paying attention to where they think, okay, well, actually nuclear weapons are what is keeping us safe right now. So see, Leah's unmuted, maybe has some insight to share. Maybe not.
Sorry, I'm unmuted accidentally. Didn't at all mean to stop you, Molly. I really would just, if anything, want to echo what you're saying. That I think we're all on the same page, that now is more important than ever, that we promote the agenda of the TPNW. And I think we have more interest than we have in a really, really long time in our movement. Just as Molly was saying, within IPPNW Canada specifically this year, we got about 6 times more applicants for our intern program. We've also had many, many more, both like of all demographics reaching out to see how people can get involved. So making sure that we're creating the spaces to onboard people into the movement and to onboard people into IPPNWC and this movement, making sure we have the resources prepared to do so, and leveraging this moment in history where the world is changing to make sure nuclear disarmament is a part of that change. I think goes without saying that Russia's invasion is really, really a humanitarian crisis and really horrendous. But as some of the people with the knowledge of how we could move forward, and with the people who understand what the blueprint for disarmament looks like, that was the slogan of ICANN throughout the band forum. But we have studied and understand what a blueprint for disarmament looks like. So just making sure we're part of implementing that, because the world is changing right now at a really rapid rate. And I think IPPNW is a really, really essential part of making sure that change is for a better world. And we've got a lot of work to do this year in Canada. So I hope that somewhat answered your question, Dave.
Thank you, everyone. Sarah, do you have anything else to add on that point from your perspective?
Yeah, I can add a little bit. I know during all of the events that we attended throughout the week, everybody seemed to be touching on this because it was such a pivotal moment, I guess, in current world events, but also throughout history. And because it's all kind of leading up to a moment, and we can't let that moment happen. And so now people are seeing Ukraine as that moment. And for us particularly, it can, like everyone was saying, motivate us into a world without nuclear weapons, because we can either have this as the moment where nuclear war starts or nuclear war decreases, our chances decrease because so many people realize the impacts that it can have, and because people are more motivated to get educated about this issue, and because it's becoming more relevant to everybody and they're seeing that relevance. And I think one really impactful thing that I heard a lot was, if we have to make sure that there's a country, a world left after a war. With nuclear weapons, there isn't anything. There's no country, there's no city, there's no world if we start a nuclear war. And so moving forward from conflict, we have to make sure that there's a world left to live in, that there's an infrastructure, that we have resources to use, which a nuclear war wouldn't give us. And I think that was really impactful. And hearing Kibakisha as well talk about their perspectives on the Ukraine war. And one was remembering their experiences sitting in a bomb shelter and relating that to Ukrainians now sitting in their own bomb shelters. And now they know the threat of nuclear war is very real for them. Back when in World War II, they didn't know that. And so now, knowing what happened last time and kind of realizing that the threat is so real for them is so, I imagine, terrifying. And knowing that their fear right now, I think is a great, or not a great motivator, but I mean, it is, but it's a devastating fact of the reality that some people are living in, and the terror and fear that they have to go through every day, and using that to push forward our work yeah.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It was pointed out that also I think there's a lot going on in regards to the meetings and this topic. It was definitely at the forefront of a lot of events and remains to be. So thank you all for touching on this. Just in the interest of time, want to now close our session and thank all of our speakers for spending this time with us. We genuinely appreciate it, and it was great to see all of you at the MSP in Vienna, and so great to hear everything that you all got out of it as well. So thank you all, and thank you all for joining us as well in the participants room. So great to see you, and looking forward to seeing all of the more wonderful things that come out of this meeting. So thank you all, have a great night, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.